We're going to be talking tonight about a Torah portion called Balak. It appears in the book of Numbers, beginning in chapter 22, running through chapter 25, the beginning of 25. And as I read over the Torah portion today in preparation for tonight, there were three themes that jumped out at me that I think will be interesting to think about. The first is the whole question of archaeology and the Bible. This Torah portion includes the name of the oldest verified person who is mentioned in another source in the ancient Near Eastern archaeological record. There's a prophet whose name is Balaam. He's not a Jewish prophet, he's actually a non-Jewish prophet, but his name appears in an archaeological relic that dates back to the 8th century BCE. So we're talking the 700s BCE. It's a stele, a monument or monumental inscription that was found in Tel Deir Allah on the east side of the River Jordan. And it references this Balaam, son of Beor, seer of the gods. It's fascinating that there's the same name in the Hebrew Bible, not only his name, but the name of his father and his profession, and yet it's reflected in the archaeological records. This is the reason why in the early days of the field, archaeology was called biblical archaeology, because the concept was you would have a spade in one hand and a Bible in the other, and you would dig up and prove prove the Bible from what you'd find in the ground. And this discovery in the 1860s was one of those discoveries that really blew people's minds as a confirmation the Bible is true. There's even been claims recently that a famous monumental stele refers to King Balak, the namesake for this Torah portion. But we have to remember that the Bible is being written many centuries after the events it claims to have taken place. And so it may have been that Balaam was famous in the 8th century, but this story, which we're going to read, supposedly takes place in the 13th century BCE, so almost 500 years beforehand. It could well be that the people writing the story put in the name of a contemporary or someone who was famous in their own day, even though the story is supposed to be happening many, many centuries before. And of course, the stories are being written many centuries after they took place, and then they were edited even later than that. So we can't rely on the Bible as a source for history, but it's not irrelevant. Think about it as historical fiction. If you read the novels of John Jakes about the Civil War, there are characters that did not exist in real life, but there are characters that did. And some of what they did in real history is reflected in the historical fiction. So this is how we have to understand biblical narrative. It's a kind of historical fiction set in a plausible time, occasionally with famous characters or places, but not necessarily what actually happened. And the other example of this is the name of the kingdom referenced here. It's the Moabites. There is a possible early reference to the Moabites in an Egyptian record from about the 13th century BCE, contemporaneous to this story. The most famous example of a reference to the Moabites is a source by the Moabites themselves that's called the Mesha Stele. Here's an inset inscription. You can see this image on your screen. This stele, this monumental inscription, was written in the Canaanite alphabet. You can see it's similar to what early Hebrew was as well, kind of a chicken scratch writing. It's an early version of what would evolve into the Hebrew/Aramaic alphabet we're familiar with today. And this monument is dated to around the year 840 BCE. It describes a revolt where the king of Moab rebelled against the outside power that was controlling him. And this outside kingdom is referred to as Beit Omri, the house of Omri. In other words, it's one of the Hebrew kingdoms that existed around that time period. According to the inscription, the god Chemosh was angry with the Moabites and allowed them to be conquered by the Israelites, which is, by the way, the same kind of explanation that happens in the Hebrew Bible for why the Israelites and the Judeans are conquered, because their God gets mad at them and wants them to be conquered. So it's very continuous with this culture. Now, this kingdom of Moab existed on the east bank of the River Jordan. You may have heard of the West Bank. That's, the occupied territories and so on. The east bank of the Jordan, as you'll see on the map here, is on the east side of the Dead Sea. It's what's today the Kingdom of Jordan. At one time, under the Ottoman Empire, it was all one territory, both the West Bank and the East Bank. That got split off by the British in the 1920s, obviously much after the time period we're talking about. The narrative we're going to be covering is taking place on this east side of the Dead Sea and the Jordan River, because the Israelites left Egypt. Egypt's off to your left here, past Gaza. If you went further west or to the left, you'd run into Egypt. So the Jews are wandering around the Sinai Desert, which is to the south here. They manage to cross the desert, and they wind up on the east side of the Jordan River, and they encounter this kingdom of Moab, as you see it on the map here. Now, the Moabites are a particularly challenging group for the Hebrews in the Hebrew Bible, because on one hand, there's a lot of hostility between the groups. The origin story for the Moabites is that they are the children of Lot, Abraham's nephew. After Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, Lot and his two daughters go and hide in the hills, and the daughters get Lot drunk. They think they're the only people left in the world. They get him drunk and they sleep with him. And the product of their incestuous union are the Ammonites and the Moabites. Now, is that a real story for where the Moabites came from? Very unlikely. It sounds more like a political genealogy to say our opponents over there, that kingdom we don't like, they're all bastards. They're all children of incest. They're terrible. So you can sense some hostility there for sure. And we'll see an example of a real hostile story later in this Torah portion in Numbers chapter 25. And even later on, the Moabites are expelled from being part of the Hebrew community, even to the 10th generation. It's many, many generations. We want nothing to do with them. However, I should also point out that Ruth, who becomes the grandmother of King David, is also a Moabite. So there's a positive and a negative side to the relations with the Moabites. And that's the second theme we'll see coming out of this story, is the relations between the Hebrews and the peoples around them. Remember, in the narrative, the Hebrews have left Egypt. They're wandering in the desert. They're making their way towards their promised land. And in theory, if they were just given safe passage, they would go through and settle down where they belong. But, as often happens, they run into conflict with the peoples around them. The people are afraid of them, or sometimes the Hebrews may feel threatening to them, the people who are rooted there, and they come into conflict. And the Hebrews themselves have a real fear of mixing with the outside peoples. This may reflect a later generation's concern when Jews are in diaspora, when Jews are conquered by the Persians and by other empires. There's a fear of mixing with the outsider that definitely is strongly there. So on one hand, you have the fear of mixing, the fear and anger, hostility at the outsider, but you also have a sense that, for lack of a better phrase, it's nice to have non-Jewish people say nice things about the Jews. Every now and then on social media, you'll see this wonderful quote about the Hebrew people by Mark Twain that everybody starts sharing around because it's so nice. Or I think about a book that came out in the 1990s called The Gifts of the Jews by an Irish writer named Thomas Cahill. It was a very smart plan to have a non-Jewish writer write a complimentary book about Jews, and Jews are a very literate and book-buying audience. So it was like a great conjunction of marketing and content. And we'll see in this story, you get certainly outside people who are hostile to the Jews, but you also get an outside figure who's going to say nice things about the Jews. And whether it really happened, and we'll see there's at least one major reason to suspect it didn't happen this way, whether it really happened or it's simply a sock puppet where they take this famous prophet Balaam that is mentioned in this monumental inscription, so must have been a well-known prophet or visionary. They take him and they have him say what they want him to say. It's a very classic ancient technique to get your message out there, is to have a famous person say it, even if they didn't really say it. And one of the things he says, and this is the third point we're going to look at, is he's going to claim to be speaking for a God. And not just any God. He's going to claim to be speaking for the Hebrew God, whose name you're not supposed to say. It's written Yud-He Vav-He. Traditionally, it's read Adonai, which means my Lord, as a substitute. But many religious people won't even say that unless they're actually praying. So they'll say Hashem, which means the name. Or sometimes they'll say Adoshem or Elohim. Like they come up with all these substitute words to avoid saying the actual word. But in the Hebrew Bible, God is referred to in a few different ways. Sometimes the word is Yahweh, which is like the proper name, think Zeus. Sometimes it's referred to as El, as a sky god. In fact, in the Canaanite pantheon, El was the high sky god, and Yahweh was one of the subordinate gods. But also sometimes divinity is referred to with the word Elohim. If you know any Hebrew, Im is often the ending for a plural. Like Yeled is boy or child, Yeladim is children. So El might be a god, and Elohim could be the gods, the divinities, the pantheon. And often Elohim takes a single verb form. So you'd think, well, maybe Elohim is just God. But if it's the pantheon does something, that's a single. It's a collective unity. So we'll see this name and naming for God shows up often again in this story. Certainly when you have a seer who claims to have supernatural vision, what God is being communicated with makes a big difference. So with that, we're going to dive into our Torah portion of Numbers. So again, we're in Numbers chapter 22, verse 2. Verse 1 simply says that the Israelites camped on and encamped on the fields of Moab, which is across the Jordan from Jericho. So that sets us on that east bank of the river. The Torah portion gets its name from one of the first words in the Torah portion. This is often the case. Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. They had had conflict with them before and had defeated them. And Moab was alarmed because that people was so numerous. Moab dreaded the Israelites. Some translated as dread, some translated as they were disgusted by or abhorred by them. Like they're like a locust swarm coming in. They're going to take over everything. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, which is another tribal group in the area, now this horde, the word is kahal, community, but also it has that sense in this statement of like a horde of animals, right? Or a conquering horde, barbarian horde. They will lick clean all that is about us as an ox licks up the grass of the field. They're going to mow us down. Balak, son of Zippor, was the Melech LaMoab. He was the king of Moab at that time. So he sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor. That's that name, right, that appears in that inscription. Balaam, son of Beor, and Pethor, which is by the Euphrates. Now remember that map? Where's the Euphrates? The Euphrates is all the way even north of this picture. It's north of Damascus. You'll find the Euphrates River. So the king of Moab is sending a messenger quite far away to try to get the assistance of the seer Balaam to get on his side. So he sent messengers to Balaam near the Euphrates to invite him, saying, there is a people that came out of Egypt. It hides the earth from view. Literally in the Hebrew, it's kisa et ayin haaretz. It covers the eye of the earth. Like you can't see it. And it is settled next to me. Come then, put a curse on this people for me. In the Hebrew, you can see va'ata lechana, and that's a biblical format of I pray you come. And you're just adding the na at the end, adds that sort of hortatory, that emphasis, the request side of it. So come and curse them for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps this way I can defeat them and drive them out of the land. I need divine assistance. I can't do it by dint of arms alone. And I know whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed. Now this phrasing, whoever you bless will be blessed, whoever you curse will be cursed, it reminds the careful reader or the religious reader who does this every week of a phrase applied to Abraham, where Abraham is told, those who bless you will be blessed, and those who oppose you or who curse you will be cursed or will suffer. So that idea of you yourself are a test, that if someone says the right thing to you, they will get the right thing, but if they say the wrong thing to you, they will get the punishment. And it's interesting that it applied to Abraham. It is applied here as well. That may be a clue that the author of the Abraham story was familiar with this story, or more likely, the author of this story is hearkening back to the Abraham story. There's also an interesting parallel about what Balaam does, using the donkey, traveling for 3 days, similar to what Abraham does with Isaac around the binding of Isaac in Exodus 22. Excuse me, the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22. So those who bless you will be blessed, those who curse you will be cursed. The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, who were versed in divination, set out. So they're even sending the people who have supernatural magical power or knowledge of those forces out to go get him. Those are the ones that might have credibility, right? They came to Balaam, the prophet, and gave him King Balak's message. And he said to them, spend the night here, and I will reply to you as Yahweh may instruct me. Literally, as Yahweh will speak to me. So the Moabite dignitaries stayed with Balaam. Now, just to ask you, why do they need to stay over the night?
They got to check out their credit, see if their credit is good.
Okay, maybe run a credit check. What else might be going on there? He has to get an appointment with the gods so that he can talk to them? Sort of. Where do you see the gods? Or maybe in what state do you see the gods? He needs to dream, right? It's overnight because he's going to have a vision as he dreams. You see, we who are crass materialists have trouble getting in the mindset of the supernaturally oriented. But if we think about it in terms of how the brain processes things, it makes sense that people in that era would see dreams as a kind of vision prophecy format. It's one of the ways the gods communicate. So it's not just that he needs a break or he needs to compose his thoughts or he needs 3 hours to make a phone call and get an appointment. No, he needs to dream because that's when he has his visions. So they stayed with Balaam. And then it says, V'yavo Elohim el Ba'am. And so divinity, the gods, whatever, came to Balaam. And he said, literally it says, Miha anashim ha'ele imach. Who are those people with you? This is interpreted as, what do these men want of you? But you might ask, why does a God need to ask either question? Shouldn't the God know who these people are? Or shouldn't the God know what they want? Isn't he watching everything like an omniscient narrator? Or is he a character in the story that doesn't necessarily know what's going on? Or is it a test? You know, teachers ask questions of students. Most of the time, the teacher knows the answer. They're not asking to find out. They're asking to know if you know. Or what do you think about this? Even if I have my own, as a teacher, as a God, an opinion. So God says, what do these men want, or who are these men? And Balaam says to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. Here is a people that came out of Egypt and hides the earth from view. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I can engage them in battle and drive them off. Now, is that what he said exactly? It's a shorter version. They hide the earth from you, put a curse on them. They're too numerous for me. Maybe I can defeat them and drive them. Well, it's close enough. It's a rephrasing, but it's pretty close. And then, so then you might ask, why does he bother to repeat it? Why does the writer of the story bother to repeat it? You just read it 2 verses ago. Why bother writing it again? This suggests that at least an early stage of this narrative was an oral story, because a lot of oral stories repeat passages. It's a way for the tension to be built, but also for the storyteller to sort of recatch their place, because they have the phrase memorized, they say it, and then they remember what they have to go next from that spot. So think about this as an echo of that oral character of the story. But God said to Balaam, Vayomer Elohim, so it's still that Elohim name, do not go with them. You must not curse that people because they are blessed. Don't mess with them. Don't try to do something bad to them. They are a blessed people. So Balaam arose in the morning. So again, you get this picture. It's a dream, right? He had this vision, and now he wakes up in the morning. He said to Balak's dignitaries, go back to your own country, for Yahweh will not let me go with you. Now, here he's using a different name. Here he's using that specific name for a specific God, the Hebrew God, who will not let him go. Now, why would the writer of this want to have Balaam call the gods the name of the Hebrew God Yahweh? Well, the answer is they're making the argument that the Hebrew God Yahweh speaks to everybody, is in charge of everything. He is the one that created the world, and therefore he can assign who lives where. And if the promised land is promised to the Hebrews, then they can take it because their God made everything. Similarly, if there's a vision that says that they are blessed in the mouth of a non-Hebrew prophet, but by the word of their God, then their God Yahweh is the God that speaks to everybody. And therefore, the prophecy they claim came from that God via Moses in the form of these rules, these laws, these commandments, and this very Torah, if you think about it in a meta sense, it is fully authorized because that's the God that speaks to everybody. So having this prophet speak to Yahweh works two ways. It makes the Jews feel better, or the Hebrews at this time. Jews is a little bit anachronistic. It makes the Hebrews feel better because this non-Jewish person is saying good things about them. But also, it makes Yahweh more important because he speaks to everybody. So the Moabite dignitaries left. They went back to King Balak, and they said, Balaam won't come with us. So then he sent other dignitaries, more numerous and more distinguished. It feels like a joke, right? You know, he goes once and asks, he says no. He goes again. Well, let's see how it goes. They came to Balaam and said to him, thus says Balak, please don't refuse to come to me. Again, alna timna meheloch alai. So again, that alna, that na request formula. I will reward you richly. I will do anything you ask of me. Only come and curse this people for me. I want one thing. You have one job. Come and give them the hex. Balaam replied to Balak's officials, though Balak were to give me his whole house, full of gold and silver, I could not do anything, big or small, contrary to the command of Yahweh Elohai, Yahweh my God. What am I supposed to do? Give me all the money you want. It doesn't matter. I can't make God do or say what God doesn't want to do or say. You too stay here overnight. Let's see if Yahweh has anything else to say. That night, God came to Balaam, again, Elohim, it says, and said to him, if these agents have come to invite you, you may go with them. But whatever I command you, that you should do. So, all right, fine. You can go, but do what I say as you go. So he arose in the morning, and Balaam saddled his donkey, and he went with the Moabite dignitaries. But God was angry at his going. Why? He did exactly what God said. God said, go with them. He went. Well, it's one of these ambiguities that sometimes God gets, well, first of all, the idea of a God getting mad is already a very kind of anthropomorphic, mythological vision of a God. But it's also an example of the narrative shifting because God's response is not necessarily rational, but it's going to drive the plot because he wants to try to stop him to make the message that much more strong. So we'll see here a malach Yahweh, a messenger of God, stood his position in the way. As and the word in Hebrew is a satan, as an adversary. It doesn't mean a Satan like a demon, but he's an opponent. And Balaam was riding on his donkey with his two servants alongside. When the donkey saw it says messenger, but it really means angel, the angel of Yahweh standing in the way with a drawn sword in his hand, the donkey swerved from the road, went into the fields. And Balaam beat the donkey to turn her back onto the road, right? Your donkey swerves off the road, you're going to correct it to get back onto the path. But notice the donkey sees the angel, but the people don't. This is again that reflection of magic power, but also kind of fantasy folktale, right? That the donkey can see something that people can't. That it sounds very mythological to me. The messenger of Yahweh, or again the angel of Yahweh, stationed himself in a lane between the vineyards with a fence on either side. No way out. And so the donkey, seeing the messenger of Yahweh, pressed herself against the wall, squeezed his foot against the wall, trying to avoid this dangerous apparition. And so he hit her again. She was doing what he thought was the wrong thing. And once more, the messenger of Yahweh moved forward and stationed himself on a spot so narrow there was no room to go to the right or the left. So now when the donkey saw this angel, she lay down under Balaam. She just sat right down, as donkeys do, right? Donkeys do what they're going to do. He was furious, and he beat the ass with a stick again. It's 3 times now. Then Yahweh opened the donkey's mouth. And the donkey said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you've beaten me these 3 times?" And what does Balaam say in response? "A talking donkey, I'm rich." No. Balaam said to the donkey, I can imagine a scenario where you're so mad at this donkey that the fact that the donkey talks to you, you don't even notice. You just go back and yell at the donkey some more. "You've made a mockery out of me. If I had a sword with me, I'd kill you." What did the donkey do wrong? Well, it was swerving off the path, and it was running into the wall, and it was lying down, and it wasn't listening. In a simple scenario, that makes sense to be mad at the donkey. But now, the donkey said to Balaam, "Look, I am the donkey you've been riding all along until this day. Have I been in the habit of doing this to you? Have I ever done anything like this?" And he answered, "No." I mean, the donkey talks back and makes a good point. Something must be out of the ordinary if I'm behaving like this. Don't you trust me? Maybe I have a reason for what I'm doing here. Then Yahweh uncovered Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of Yahweh standing in the way with a drawn sword in his hand. And thereupon he bowed right down to the ground. And the angel of Yahweh said to him, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? It was I that came out as a satan, as an adversary, for the errand is obnoxious to me. I don't like what you're doing." And when the donkey saw me, she shied away because of me those 3 times. If she had not shied away from me, you are the one I should have killed while sparing her. She saved your life, and you didn't even know. Donkey gets a prize. Balaam gets a penalty. Balaam said to the angel of Yahweh, "I was wrong. Chatati, literally, I sinned, I erred, because I did not know you were standing in my way. If you still disapprove, I will turn back." So Balaam is between a rock and a hard place here, because Yahweh said, "Okay, go, you can go." And then the angel shows up and does all this stuff, and Balaam says, "Look, I didn't even see you. And if you really don't want me to go, fine, I'll turn back, whatever you want." He really is stuck in a hard place here. But the angel of Yahweh says to Balaam, "Okay, go with the men." After all this, "But you must say nothing except what I tell you." So Balaam went on with Balak's dignitaries. So what was the point of this whole story? It was an education. Do what I say. or else. You got an angel, you got a sword, you won't even see him coming. Even your faithful donkey won't save you. So it's a warning. You're okay, you're going to go, even though I didn't want you to go. But when you go, you got to tell them what I tell you to tell them. Remember, the prophet is not a thinker. The prophet is a loudspeaker. They hear, it comes out. They are the mouthpiece of the God. When Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him on the Arnon border at his farthest point. He was happy. Balak said to Balaam, when I first sent to invite you, why didn't you come? And I really can't reward you. You don't want any of my riches, prize, anything? No payment? But Balaam the prophet said to Balak the king, now that I've come to you, have I the power to speak freely? I can only say what God puts in my mouth. Balaam's not dumb because he's saying to the king, you're going to get what you're going to get. And I can't control what the gods are going to say. You might not like what they have to say. And he wants to get some kind of assurance that he's not going to get his head cut off just for saying what the gods tell him to say. So Balaam went with Balak. They came to Kiryat Chuzot, a particular site. Balak sacrificed oxen and sheep, had them served to Balaam and the dignitaries with them. And in the morning, he took Balaam up to Bamot Baal, and from there he could see a portion of the people. Now Balaam said to Balak, build me 7 altars here, have 7 bulls and 7 rams ready. And so they offered up a bull and a ram on each altar. You can also see the importance of the number 7, 7 days of creation, right? We see 7 days for Passover, 7 days for Sukkot. So 7's a big number in Torah numerology. They offer up the sacrifices. This is, the gods want to get paid too. And they get paid in the sweet smoke and the sacrifices that are offered to them. So you are buttering them up, so to speak, so you'll get a good prophecy of what you want. So then Balaam said to Balak, stand here beside your offering while I'm gone. Maybe Yahweh will grant me a manifestation, a vision. And whatever is revealed to me, I will tell you. So he went off alone. And then God became manifest to Balaam, literally, and became known, God to Balaam, again, that Elohim name of the divinities. And Balaam said, I set up 7 altars, and I offered a bull and a ram on each altar. I did what you implicitly, I guess, or subconsciously told me I needed to do to set the right circumstances to get the word. And Yahweh put a word in Balaam's mouth. So you almost get a vision, by the way, when the Elohim are showing up, that one of them steps forward and it's Yahweh, and he's the one that's doing all the talking. But it's like the gods are showing up, and then one God is doing the communicating. So Yahweh put a word in Balaam's mouth, and he said, go back to Balak and say this. So he returned to him, found him standing beside his offerings, the dignitaries with him. And so he stood up and taught his lesson, Mashallah, his saying. And here's what Yahweh says. From Aram has Balak brought me, Moab's king from the hills of the east. Come, curse for me, Jacob. Come, tell Israel's doom. This reflects, as I've said in other sessions, the biblical style of poetry where you rhyme by meaning. So you say the same thing in 2 different sets of words. So from Aram, Balak brought me. Moab's king from the hills of the east. But there's 2 phrases for from where you came, and 2 phrases for the person who brought you. And then the second part, come, curse me, Jacob. Come, tell Israel's doom. Again, cursing Jacob and Israel's doom. That's the parallel in meaning. But then he says the key line, how can I damn whom God has not damned? If the God power doesn't curse them, what am I supposed to do? How can I doom when Yahweh hasn't doomed? And they use El and Yahweh as synonyms for the God. As I see them from mountaintops, gaze on them from the heights, there is a people that dwells apart, not counted among the nations, not considered among the nations. They're different. There's something else. Again, that message of the Hebrews maintaining separation, we'll see it come back in chapter 25. Who can count the dust of Jacob, number the dust cloud of Israel? May I die the death of the upright. May my fate be like theirs. Some of the meanings here are not necessarily clear, but this meaning in verse 11 is definitely clear. Balak the king says to Balaam the prophet, what have you done to me? Here I brought you to curse my enemies, to damn them, and instead you bless them. You had one job. Your job was to curse them. And here you've gone and blessed them. And Balaam says, I warned you. I can only faithfully repeat what Yahweh puts in my mouth. Balak said to him, let's go to another place from which you can see them. Right now you can only see part of them, and then you'll curse them from there. So Balak is sort of a slow learner here, right? He's not quite getting how it works. And with that, he took him to another site. They built 7 altars, offered a ram and a bull on each altar. And Balaam said to Balak, stay beside your offerings. I'll go over there to find a manifestation. It happens. He gets a word. He comes back. He stands beside the offering. Balak says to him, what did Yahweh say? What is the word of Yahweh? And so he begins his mashal, begins his teaching. He says, up, Balak, attend. Give ear to me, son of Tzipor. Again, you see that parallel. Get up and listen. God is not human to be capricious. Lo ish el, that means not a person is a god. Or a ben Adam, a child of Adam, a mortal, to change their heart. Would God speak and not act? Would God promise and not fulfill? Well, a humanist might have a different answer to this than the prophet would. But after all, we think it's the people who are making the promising and speaking anyways. They're just claiming it's a God doing it. And if it doesn't happen, well, it's because people are imperfect. But in this case, the concept is, yes, of course, a God will do what a God says. My message was to bless. When God blesses, I can't reverse it. There is no harm in sight for Jacob, no woe in view for Israel. Their God, Yahweh, is with them. Their kings are acclaimed in their midst. God who freed them from Egypt is like them for the horns of the wild ox. He's the leading, pointing edge. He's the tip of the spear to lead them forward. Lo, there is no augury in Jacob, no divining in Israel. Jacob is told at once, yes, Israel, what God has planned. They don't have to rely on seers who go to sleep and see visions. They don't have to, slaughter an animal and check the shape of its organs, or look for patterns of birds in the sky, or put oil on the water and try and see what the shape is, or throw dice, look for signs. They get the word directly. Yahweh speaks to them direct. So they don't have to rely on signs and visions. They have a direct line. Look, a people that rises up like a lioness, leaps up like a lion, does not rest until it's feasted on prey and drunk the blood of the slain. That's how powerful they are. So then Balak said to Balaam, shut up. At a minimum, don't curse them and don't bless them. At least leave them neutral. You keep adding to the positive ledger for them. That's not helping me. And Balaam says again, whatever Yahweh says, that I must do. And now Balak says, come, I'll take you to a third place. I mean, if this were a comedian's routine, with the talking donkey and the king that takes him and then, oh, look, he blessed them again instead of cursing them. Well, let's try a different place. Maybe it'll work over here. Oh, and he blesses them instead of curses them. I can't believe it. I mean, it's a farce almost. Maybe if I go to this third place, the Elohim, the gods, will deem it right that you curse them for me there. So he takes him to the peak of Peor, which overlooks the wasteland, the desert. Balaam said to Balak, build me 7 altars, have 7 bulls and 7 rams. And he did it again. Now, what do you think is going to happen next? I think we know. Now, Balaam, seeing that it pleased Yahweh to bless Israel, did not go in search of omens. He turned his face to the wilderness. He didn't have to bother going looking for other things. He saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, and just by seeing them, the Ruach Elohim, the divine spirit, came upon him. So this people is not just a case of if you bless them, you'll be blessed. If you see them, you'll have a divine experience. It's like a spiritual experience just to see them. And certainly because he blessed them twice, the fact that he sees them in their whole assembled multitude, it's a sign that he's blessed that he gets this vision right away. And taking up his mashal, his theme, he says, word of Balaam, son of Beor, word of the man whose eye is true, word of one who hears God's speech, who beholds vision from the Almighty, bow down with eyes unveiled. And this line, how fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel, is actually part of the Jewish liturgical tradition. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkanotecha Yisrael. There are other melodies too, but it becomes part of the Siddur, part of the prayer book, because it's praising the Hebrews. But again, having the non-Jewish prophet praise them makes it even a little sweeter. Like palm groves that stretch out, like gardens beside a river, like aloes planted by Yahweh, like cedars by the water. They're rooted in abundant water. They rise above Agag, who's a famous king in the area. Their sovereignty is exalted. Literally, their kingdom is exalted. The God who freed them from Egypt is like the horns of the ox. They devour enemy nations, crush their bones, and smash their arrows. They will beat everybody. They crouch like a lion who dares rouse them. And again, that line, blessed are those who bless you, cursed are those who curse you. It's like the punchline at the end. That's what it started with, right? And now here it is at the end of the prophecy. Enraged at Balaam, Balak struck his hands together. I called you to damn my enemies, and you've blessed them 3 times. Again, how dumb is Balak? Back with you to your own place. I was going to reward you, but Yahweh denied you the reward. Balaam said, but I told the messengers. Even if his house was full of silver, I couldn't do anything. What Yahweh says, I must say. And now as I go back to my people, let me tell you what will happen to your people. So that's the punchline. The punchline is what's going to happen to the Moabites. Word of Balaam, son of Beor, word of the man whose eye is true, word of one who hears God's speech, who obtains knowledge from the Most High. What I see for them is not yet. What I behold will not be soon. A star rises from Jacob. A scepter comes out of Israel. It smashes the brow of Moab, the foundation of all the children of Set. Edom becomes a possession, Seir a possession of its enemies, but Israel is triumphant. A victor issues from Jacob to wipe out what is left, and so on to conquer others. But I want to come back to that line, a star rises from Jacob to smash Moab. One of the uses of prophecy is to predict future futures. This is claiming to say in the future Moab will be destroyed by Israel. But later generations who read this text imagined a different kingdom was the stand-in for Moab. Maybe Moab is Rome. Maybe Moab is the Greeks. Maybe Moab is the Persians. And the star that rises will be a future redeemer. There was a famous revolt against the Roman Empire around the year 132 of the Common Era by a man who was known as Bar Kokhba, the son of a star. His name was actually Bar Kozba, but that changed over time because some called him Bar Koziba, the son of a lie. But the claim that he was the son of a star, the Bar Kokhba, probably draws back to this line that from Jacob a star will come, a redeemer. And the Moabites were thought to be the Romans at this time. It's just reapplying the prophecy to different generations. So again, more prophecies. Who can survive unless God wills it? It's all in the hands of this God. Even the Assyrians, the Ashur, will be wiped out by ships coming from the Kittim, from the Greeks, as it's understood, or from the Mediterranean anyways. So Balaam went home and Balak went home, and that's the end of that story. So you can see how it plays kind of like a farce, kind of like a comic book, or something ridiculous, but also is trying to put out a clear message that Yahweh is in charge of all and that he will be with the Israelites to bless those that bless them. And that conflict between the Hebrews and the outside peoples will continue. And that's what happens in chapter 25. And we only have the first few verses here. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the menfolk profaned themselves by whoring with the Moabite women. It actually is using the word liznot, to prostitute oneself, to be promiscuous, to sleep around with the Moabite women. Literally, the Benot Moab, the daughters of Moab. who invited the menfolk to the sacrifices for their God. They partook of them and worshiped that God. So what's the whoring? Some of it's sex, but it's also a lack of fidelity to the God of Israel. It's godding around with other gods. Remember, in the Ten Commandments, I am a jealous God. You will have no other gods before me. It is even described in other places that the Hebrews, the Israelites, go whoring after other gods. This God wants a monogamous relationship with the Hebrew people. And that means don't go sleeping with outside women and don't go talking to outside gods. They're seen as parallel. And the women are leading the men astray, first with their bodies and then with their gods. And thus Israel attached itself to Baal Peor. Now, Baal Peor means the Baal, the god of Peor, the sort of idolatrous god of Peor. But the word Baal itself actually just means master, Lord, like Adon, like Adonai. So really, it's a particular god of that location that was the master of that location. It's not necessarily the name of the god as Baal. And Yahweh, no surprise, was mad at Israel. They've gone a whoring theologically as well as physically. So Yahweh said to Moses, take the leaders, have them publicly impaled before Yahweh, so his wrath will turn away from Israel. God gets mad a lot. And so Moses says to Israel's official, each of you slay those of his men attached to the Baal Peor. And just then, a certain Israelite man came and brought a Midianite woman to his companions in the sight of Moses and the whole Israelite community, who were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting from all this sinning. And when Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, so Aaron's grandson, he left the assembly, took a spear in his hand, he followed the Israelite man into the chamber and stabbed both of them, the Israelite man and the woman, through the belly. Now, how could he stab both of them through the belly in one thrust? What position were they in? Right? And thus the plague, God's anger against the Israelites, was stopped. And those who died of the plague numbered 24,000. It didn't even mention a plague yet, but we can assume if God's mad, that means people are dying. So what does Pinchas do? He kills two people, an Israelite man and a Moabite woman, who are violating that boundary in the tabernacle of all places. Davka, of all places, they have to do it there. His reward, as appears in the next Torah portion, which is called Pinchas, is he receives a covenant of peace. He becomes the eternal line of the priesthood for his zealotry, for his desire to defend the honor of Yahweh and the purity of the Hebrew line. So sometimes those relationships are comic, right? You've got the Balaam and Balak farce, and sometimes it's deadly serious. The desire to keep those boundaries high and to keep the women over there and the men over there, to keep it out of the sanctuary, and to keep the Hebrews separate. The people that stands apart, right? The people that dwells apart, we saw in the prophecy, that's the goal here. And the problem is they keep mixing. Now, when we read this from a more open-minded perspective, we realize we who celebrate the fact that we are free to mix, that we've always mixed. All of this condemnation, all of these stories that are saying how terrible it is to mix, how terrible it is to mix, it implies we've always mixed. And so the mixing we have today is also a long and well-rooted Jewish tradition. Well, I hope you enjoyed that tour through the Torah portion of Talking Donkeys and Double Murder. It's sort of an odd combination, but you can see how it kind of makes sense in that general theme of relations with the outside world.